80. The nut. If the sperm whale may be physiognomically a sphinx, to the phrenologist his brain seems a geometric circle which is impossible to square. In a full-grown creature, the skull will measure at least 20 feet in length. Unhinged, the lower jaw and the side view of the skull is the side of a moderately inclined plane, resting throughout on a level base. But in life, as we have elsewhere seen, this inclined plane is angularly filled up and almost squared by the enormous superincumbent mass of the junk and sperm. At the high end, the skull forms a crater to the bed of the part of the mass, while under the long floor of this crater, in another cavity seldom exceeding 10 inches in length and as many in depth, reposes the mere handful of the monster's brain. The brain is at least 20 feet from his apparent forehead in life. It is hidden away by its vast outworks, like the innermost citadel within an amplified fortifications of Quebec. So, like a choice casket is secreted in him, I have known some whalemen who peremptorily deny the sperm whale has any other brain than that palpable semblance of one, formed by the cubic yards of his sperm magazine. Lying in strange folds, courses, and convolutions to their apprehension, it seems more in keeping with the idea of his general might to regard that mystic part of him as the seat of his intelligence. It is plain, then, that phrenologically, the head of the Leviathan in this creature's living intact state is an entire delusion. As for his true brain, you can see no indications of it, nor feel any. The whale, like all things that are mighty, wears a false brow to the common world. If you unload his skull of its spermy heaps and then take a rear view of its rear end, which is the high end, you will be struck by its semblance to the human skull, beheld in the same situation and from the same point of view. Indeed, place this reverse skull, scaled down to human magnitude, among the plate of men's skulls, and you would involuntarily confound it with them, and, remarkably, the depressions on part of its summit. In phrenological phrase, you would say, this man had no self-esteem, no veneration, and by those negations, considered along with the affirmative fact of his prodigious bulk and power, you can best form to yourself the truest, though not the most exhilarating conception of what the most exalted potency is. But if from the comparative dimensions of the whale's proper brain you deem it incapable of being adequately charted, then I have another idea for you. If you attentively regard almost any quadruped spine, you will be struck with the resemblance of its vertebrae to a string necklace of dwarfed skulls, all bearing the rudimentary resemblance to the skull proper. It is a German conceit that the vertebrae are absolutely undeveloped skulls, but the curious external resemblance I take in the Germans was not first men to perceive. A foreign friend once pointed it out to me in the skeleton of a foe he had slain, and when the vertebrae of which he was inlaying in a sort of basso relief the beaked prow of his canoe. Now I consider that the phrenologists have omitted an important thing in not pushing their investigations from the cerebellum through the spinal canal. For I believe that much of a man's character will be found betokened in his backbone. I would rather feel your spine than your skull, whoever you are. A thin joist of a spine never yet upheld a full and noble soul. I rejoice in my spine as in the firm, audacious staff of that flag which I fling half out to the world. Apply this spinal branch of phrenology to the sperm whale. His cranial cavity is continuous with the first neck vertebrae, and in that vertebra the bottom of the spinal canal will measure 10 inches across, being 8 in height, and from the triangular figure with the base downwards. As it passes through the remaining vertebrae, the canal tapers in size, but for a considerable distance remains of large capacity. Now, of course, this canal is filled with much the same strangely fibrous substance, the spinal cord, as the brain, and directly communicates with the brain. And what is more, for many feet after emerging from the brain's cavity, the spinal cord remains of undecreasing girth, almost equal to that of the brain. Under these circumstances, it would be unreasonable to survey and map out a whale's spine phrenologically, for, viewed in this light, the wonderful comparative smallness of his brain proper is more than compensated by the wonderful comparative magnitude of his spinal cord. But leaving this hint to operate as it may be with phrenologists, I would merely assume the spinal theory for a moment in reference to the sperm whale's hump. This august hump, if mistake not, rises over one of the larger vertebrae, and is therefore in some sort the outer convex mold of it. From its relative situation, then, I should call this high hump the organ of the firmness, or the indomitableness of the sperm whale. And that the great monster is indomitable, and yet you will have reason to know. This is the end of chapter 80. So he talks about the brain of the sperm whale, and talks about phrenology, and he says, you can use phrenology all you want, but you'll have no concept of what the brain of the sperm whale is like, because it's like buried underneath all of this head. So the sperm whale has this really massive head, and it has a relatively huge brain, but the problem is that a brain this big and a body that's like huge is just relatively tiny. Now, he talks about the spinal cord being almost the same size as a brain, going down quite a distance. And there have been some paleontologists who suggested that dinosaurs, which are famous for having tiny brains, actually had brain in front and brain in back. And so that they had like two brains that worked together, and like the back brain controlled the back half, and there were signals passed back and forth, and that it dealt with things in that kind of distributed fashion. Like a fire truck. Really long fire trucks have two drivers, one in the front, one to steer the rear. Because sometimes you want to take the fire truck and you want to move it like this. And when you move it like this, you turn the back wheels and the front wheels, and so back and the front pull and the middle goes. Other times you want to go around the corner. So you take the front wheels and you turn them, and the front of the truck goes like this. But the back wheels keep going relatively straight. And then eventually you turn the back wheels as the back starts to go around the corner. So some long fire trucks actually have two sets of steering, so they can make it around tight corners and still go mostly sideways. So dinosaurs might have had two brains. Melville here is talking about how the front part of the spinal cord is almost the same size as the sperm whale's brain, which may mean that, yes, it's doing processing out in the spinal cord in addition to doing thinking in the brain. Now, if you're to take a look at the human brain, you have the cerebrum up in the front, which is most of the mass of the human brain. Then you have this kind of half a fist lump behind that called the cerebellum. And the cerebrum, according to modern theories, is probably correct at this point, but the cerebrum does like all the heavy thinking. That does all of the cognition. That's memory. That's putting things together. That's language. All of these different things. The cerebellum kind of acts like a macro. Now, a macro is like where you hit one character and you get 10 words. So, it's like you hit one character and you get a whole bunch of information. And the research that they've done shows that the cerebellum kind of acts like a macro, or controls macros. So when you're tying your shoes, I don't know how I tie my shoes. I take the laces in my hand, and then I say, tie my shoes, and then all of a sudden my shoes are tied. There's this muscle memory. It's referred to as muscle memory, but the hands know that they go like that, and the knot appears. So the same sort of thing happens when I'm typing. I think the word fish, and the word fish appears in front of me. I don't know where my fingers go. If I look down at the keyboard, it actually slows me down a little bit, because my brain is like, call me Ishmael, and then all of a sudden call me Ishmael appears. So the fingers move, and all that type of stuff is done in the cerebellum. And the third part of the brain is called the Medula Oblongata, which is I can't remember what medulla means. I think it's like globe or thing, blob. Oblongata is elongated. So this is also called the brainstem. And this deals with the really basic respiration and heartbeat and controlling things that you don't really think about. It does a lot of the intrinsic balance. So when you're standing, your feet adjust subtly. And that does part of that. The cerebellum does part of that. But it's the one that's responsible for just like taking the different signals and sorting it out and pre-processing. So the whale has a large spinal cord, and probably a lot of that is medulla oblongata, so it's the brain stem. So I don't know. There's no real good way right now to know what a whale is thinking, but it has a big brain, and so it can do a lot of it.